as Mr. Conley in just a few minutes. Then we'll turn to our panel of witnesses. We'll hear from them, and then we'll go through a series of questions to the panelists and witnesses who are participating today. Again, Mr. Issa always starts off with a little colloquy saying how important our responsibility is to conduct oversight. We're the stewards of taxpayer dollars, and also we created these programs through legislation like TSA, and we have a responsibility to, from time to time, conduct oversight, make certain they run as efficiently, economically, and as effectively as possible. And that's the purpose of our being here today. So with that, we'll begin the hearing. I have an opening statement. The staff wrote one. We may put that as part of the record. And I wrote my own at 3 a.m. this morning. It's a little bit different, but had some time to think about it, and I thought I would give my commentary. But first, I must say to Mr. Conley and Mr. Meadows and staff, the last few weeks that TSA has been fairly cooperative and provided us with more information than we've gotten in the past, which I appreciate the working relationship. Other than that, the reason that we're here is, again, and I mentioned to both Mr. Meadows and Mr. Conley that I was one of the people who helped create TSA, actually picked the name myself, and then with other members of Congress, we enacted the legislation pretty rapidly after the events of 9/11. President Bush wanted the legislation on his desk by Thanksgiving, and we did deliver it. The country had been hit by the most significant terrorist attack since probably World War II, when they struck us at Pearl Harbor, and we needed to act. We needed an effective transportation security operation, and we tried to do that. We made some mistakes, and we've tried to correct them, work with a number of administrators, some outstanding people, Michael Jackson, I remember, for example. And also we lost jurisdiction for some time as we started in transportation, shifted TSA over to Homeland Security, and I think that's part of its problem. It's an agency within 200 and some thousand personnel, combining 22 agencies and making it work well doesn't always work well. That being said, when we started again changing out the way we screen passengers, we passed in the law a provision, and we never intended TSA to operate passenger screening, aviation passenger screening forever. In fact, we set up as a compromise to have 5 initial airports set up with private screening under Federal supervision. And let me say at this juncture that I have never advocated going back to having the airlines do that or take away the government's responsibility. I think it is important that we maintain that. But if you analyze the events of 2001 and the terrorist attack, it was the government that failed, not the private screening. The government failed for several years to put in place standards for screening. The government failed for several years to put in rules of what could be taken on a plane. For example, box cutters were not prohibited at that time, all of which led to, again, the events of September 11th. When we set up the screening program, we had an all-Federal screening for most of the airports. And for the first 2 years, we also had and initially created 5 airports, 1 in each size category, with private screening under Federal supervision. We tested the performance of the 2 models after some 2 years, And the GAO, which independently looked at them, came up with a report, and the report said that private screening under federal supervision performs statistically significantly better. Not my words, their words. After that, as TSA saw applications for privatization, they began a campaign to make certain that airports did not opt out. They had a very hostile attitude toward taking that option, intimidated some of the airports right up to several years ago when one of my airports, the Sanford Airport, had said that they had had enough of the way TSA was operating, wanted to opt out. And then I got a call from the airport director who said, in fact, he was never so disgusted. They tried to intimidate him. They were rude, offensive, and threatening. That prompted me to get re-engaged, and here we are today. And as a result of TSA's action, not mine, I worked with other members when we passed the FAA reauthorization bill. President Obama signed it into law 2 years ago next month. In February, it was 2 years ago. And in that bill, we went from the language in the original law that said an airport can submit an application to opt out, and TSA may accept it, to language which said that TSA shall accept it, the application to opt out, because members of Congress like myself and others were frustrated with what was going on. That was 2 years ago. So here we are at this oversight hearing this morning, and basically what's happened in those 2 years is TSA has performed really a very clever, slow rollout of implementation of the provisions we requested. In fact, the TSA report, which I have, Screening Partnership Annual Report, says that in their report, not my report, January 2013, that none of the three major goals towards implementing private screening were completed. So that's, again, their report. All top priorities, none of them were met. As a result of this hearing, for example, my airport, which has been waiting now some 2 years, finally got notification, I guess on Friday or sometime soon, that they are moving forward with an RFP, which is almost 2 years later. That's not what we intended, and that's not why we're here. Unfortunately, I might say, too, for the record, that the United States is now one of the very few Western countries that has an all-federal passenger screening system. Bulgaria, Romania, and Poland are a few of the Western states that keep an all-government force in place. Almost every other nation, including those hit hard by terrorist threats, Israel, UK, use private screening under federal supervision, which is the model we anticipated would be in place by now. Unfortunately, TSA is both the regulator, the administrator, the operator, the auditor, and the contractor, and that creates a conflict, and there have been recent articles that that model needs to be changed. I believe that TSA should, again, set the rules, conduct the audits, get out of the personnel business. The agency has grown from 16,500 screeners after 9/11 to 66,000 employees, 51,000 screeners, and 15,000 administrative personnel. The personnel work hard, and there's some very dedicated screeners and employees. They make on average $38,000 apiece. The 15,000 administrators, we spend $1.1 billion on 15,000 administrators. We spent $1.9 billion on all the rest of the 51,000 personnel. Something's wrong in those numbers. Now, we only have about 457 airports, and if you have 15,000 administrators, do the math, and that means there are 30 administrators for every airport in the country. 35 airports handle 75% of the passengers. So there obviously is something wrong in our distribution of administration funding, again, what we're doing. Unfortunately, also, most of the reports we have, and I just have a few of them here, and what also prompted us to put into law, again, the requirement they shall accept the application, is when we had TSA in the past perform a review of the cost of screening, the private screening versus all Federal screening. They cooked the books and, in fact, did not include elements of costs that should be applied, and tried to tell folks that it costs more than the all-Federal program, which just defies even logic. But GAO came back and said, in fact, they did cook the books in analyzing that. And one of the considerations we did put in the law was that we should look at costs. They've used that provision, again, to slow roll, to obfuscate. What is it? What's the term? Obfuscate? I'm not saying it right.
Obfuscate.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to just say that they're not being transparent. And again, that's regrettable. In most of the areas of dealing with a private screening partnership, they have unfortunately acted arbitrarily. The acquisition process and contract process has been a disaster. We've ended up with court. Some of the awards have been delayed. I was talking with Mr. Moran on the way over here, and he was talking about the delays at Dulles and some of the other airports, and how they were having trouble recruiting people. You may know the history of them recruiting people in the Washington area by advertising on the top of pizza boxes or advertisements above discount gas pumps for personnel. The retention, as particularly in our metropolitan areas, continues to be a problem. The solutions for, again, for dealing with having people on the job, the national screening force, and other costs incurred, studies have all shown huge problems. So I won't get into all of the reports that have criticized the TSA, but as we know, we've had a horrible experience with some of the acquisition, not only of personnel, retention and training, but also we've had fiascos with the purchase of the puffers, which is hundreds of millions of dollars, ended up destroying them, and most recently taking out $500 million worth of backscatter equipment from the airports. In fact, staff should kind of track and see where those have gone. But again, these are not my reports. We've had reports on behavior detection program, which also recommends stopping that program. It's ineffective. But today's focus is primarily on the screening partnership program and trying to, in fact, make that work. My goal will be, and I'll be introducing legislation sometime in the next month, which will require all TSA to opt out all airports within 24 months of the President signing the bill, and having all airports again have the model which we intended, and get TSA out of the personnel business and the human resources and into the security and intelligence business. Finally, even though we passed the law and we said you must accept these applications, almost none of them have actually moved forward. And again, it's a slow roll and purposely to ignore the intent of Congress. What concerns me also is I have reports back that the Screening Partnership Office in TSA is in disarray, that the major and knowledgeable people have left, just about everyone. And I think we may want to look at even moving the contracting from TSA for these screening services to an agency like GSA, which routinely does this. We have private screening under Federal supervision for our nuclear facilities, for our defense facilities, for a whole host of very sensitive operating positions. And yet we have a disaster in a program which, again, was intended to be crafted quite differently. So those are some of my long opening comments. I have a little bit more history than some of the other members in this, but I wanted to share with you how we got to this stage and to this oversight. I've also asked staff from the Appropriations Committee to attend this hearing and staff from the Authorizing Committee because we can conduct oversight, but they control the money and the policy, and I'm expecting them to also act so that we get to where Congress intended us to be on this issue. Mr. Conley.
Thank you so much, Chairman Mica, and thank you for holding today's oversight hearing of the Transportation Security Administration Screening Partnership Program. Following September 11th, Congress established TSA to safeguard our nation's commercial aviation transportation system. Today, TSA is responsible for screening airline passengers and baggage at more than 450 airports throughout the United States. In 2004, TSA created the SPP to enable commercial airport operators to apply to forego Federal screeners in favor of qualified private sector screening contractors that meet Federal standards and who operate under Federal oversight. There are currently 14 airports where passenger screening is performed by a private contractor and 6 additional airports awaiting contract awards, which I understand will be announced later this year. Of these 20 airports, nearly half are small airports located in the State of Montana. Is that correct? In 2012, the Government Accountability Office performed an assessment of the performance of SPP airports. While the details of that analysis remain classified, GAO did find that some SPP airports performed slightly above the national average on some measures, while others performed slightly below. GAO also recommended in its report that TSA develop a mechanism to monitor performance of private screeners versus Federal screeners. TSA concurred with the recommendation and has begun the long overdue process of evaluating private sector screening performance to ensure air travel remains secure. Although the detailed results of these assessments are sensitive or classified, I nonetheless look forward to hearing what is being done to correct subpar performance where identified. Proponents of expanding the SPP program assert that private screeners improve efficiency and reduce costs compared to Federal screeners. However, TSA's cost estimates have found the opposite, concluding that private screening costs are generally between 3 to 9% higher than Federal screening. In light of that discrepancy between cost-saving claims and certainly the Chairman's legitimate concerns over the validity of the cost estimate methodology, I am interested in this hearing in examining the matter closely to ensure that Congress and TSA utilize the most accurate performance and cost data available so that we can be properly informed about oversight operations and the possibility of future legislation. It is no secret that debates over TSA often elicit strong reactions from members and the public alike, often stemming from anecdotal yet very real instances of inconvenience and perceived poor customer service. Mr. Hogan, I am afraid I shared with you my own unhappy anecdotal experience most recently. Security is our main focus, but it can't be our only focus. Given the fact that we are interacting with the public to the tune of millions and millions and millions of passengers, it seems to me that some emphasis on training of proper customer interaction is very important. It's important how we treat the American citizen, and it's important how we treat our foreign guests. Both deserve dignity at an airport. It is a stressful enough situation for the passenger. It's also stressful for the TSA because they have an awesome responsibility, and we do sympathize with that and we respect it. But we also need to respect the passengers we're asking to cooperate. And when we mistreat them by barking orders at them as if they are cattle, not people, we actually diminish the spirit of cooperation. We don't enhance it. And as I indicated to you privately before this hearing, Mr. Hogan, I do not understand why that can't be a simple matter of training. I don't understand how hard it is to teach people, make sure you use the words please and thank you when you're interacting with our public. Show that respect, that basic respect. In my experience this last weekend, going out, I took the red eye back, I counted in one encounter 20 barked orders, never once the word please with any of the TSA people I encountered. Take that off, move over there, back up, put your hands up, take your shoes off. Not once was the word please used. And that lack of courtesy, shows a lack of respect for the public with which you're dealing. A public that is unbelievably tolerant, frankly, of how it's being treated. Maybe that has something to do with just the culture of airports these days, where many American airlines seem actually to resent having customers. And so that lack of respect has just become part of the culture of air travel. But when we represent the Federal Government, or we are overseeing private sector entities that are taking over some of these responsibilities, we have to show a respect for the public, understanding that their cooperation is essential to our mission. And so I don't think it's a trivial issue. I don't think it's a nice thing to do if we got time. I think it's integral to the mission of security. And if I can't get assurances that we're going to take that seriously and we're going to redouble our efforts to make sure that TSA agents or the private sector analogs are properly trained in how to deal in customer service and show respect for the public we're serving, then we're going to have to do something legislatively about it. I'm going to insist. And I know I won't have any resistance on the other side of the aisle on that one. So I'm going to use this hearing today, Mr. Hogan, to get some assurance from you, because I've had it, and I think a lot of the public has had it. There is no excuse for it. And so we got to take it seriously. And I'm really doubly grateful for this hearing, because this is one of my pet peeves. I've mentioned it many times over the 5 years I've been in this job, and I see no improvement at all in my own experience in the airports. And if necessary, one thing we might do, since my colleagues, unlike me, I live here, I don't have to travel, as Mr. Bell knows, but my colleagues are on a plane at least twice a week, going home and coming back. And I'm going to start, if we don't get some satisfaction, to use my colleagues as a filter. Tell us about your experience. And by the way, let's encourage the public to tell their member of Congress. And we'll feed it all to you, Mr. Hogan, so that then you'll have to deal with it, because we're going to make a big issue out of it. So either we deal with this and respect the public we're serving, understanding we have a stressful mission. And by the way, enormous respect goes to TSA and to you, Mr. Hogan, and your colleagues for the fact that, thank God, we have not had a recurrence of 9/11. So cumbersome though it is, uncomfortable, stressful, the mission, we've been focused properly on the mission, and it, so far, thank God, knock on wood, has worked. But that doesn't mean we can't make the process better. And as I said, create a framework that fosters more cooperation and willingness and understanding from the public, not less. And so forgive the lecture, but you can see I have enormous frustration with the experience I see the public experiencing. And we've got to do something about it. And we've got to, I hope we can do it collaboratively. I hope we don't have to do it legislatively. It's not really a complicated issue. But I can tell you that what I witnessed the public going through is unacceptable behavior by Federal civil servants. And I'm one too. And I don't like seeing my government represented that way with so many millions of the public who interact with these systems, as they go to travel. So that's my plea, and also it's going to be my insistence. Thank you all for being here, and I look forward to hearing your testimony. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Conley. To our Vice Chairman, Mr. Meadows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. Thank each of you for coming. I'll be very, very brief. Mr. Conley has said it well, and I guess part of the frustration that you're hearing is that there is no federal agency that really is representative of the federal government to the vast majority of people where they actually come in contact with a federal employee other than TSA. So you really are the face of the federal government. So your efficiencies or inefficiencies, your manners or lack thereof, is a broad brush approach. I think you have many very dedicated, capable, fine public servants, and I appreciate the fact that we have safety. But as Mr. Conley so eloquently put it, what happens is I get more complaints about TSA's efficiency, but more importantly, their rude behavior on how they treat passengers than almost anything else. And so I challenge you to look from a customer service perspective, on how we can effectively change this, because if not, there will be great bipartisan support to find a private sector. We're talking about that partnership today, but there will be great bipartisan support to find a private sector, more customer-friendly way of doing it. And so I do that in the spirit of just saying the responsibility that you have is great in terms of the viability long-term of your particular agency. I want to apologize. I'm going to have to step out and be back and forth. I've got a transportation and infrastructure hearing that's going on right now for the highway bill, but I'll be back and forth. But thank each of you, and I will give back to you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman, and now we'll turn to our panel of witnesses. And today we have 3 witnesses. We have Mr. Kelly Hogan, Assistant Administrator for Security Operations at the TSA, Mr. Mark Bell, Acting Deputy Inspector General for Audits at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Office of Inspector General, and Ms. Jennifer Grover, and she is the Acting Director of Homeland Security and Justice at the Government Accountability Office. I'd like to welcome all of our witnesses. I'm not sure if you've been before us before, but if you have a lengthy statement or some documentation you'd like to be included in the record as part of the hearing, you can request that through the chair or a member. This is also an investigative subcommittee of Congress, and we do swear in our witnesses. So if you'll stand, raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give before this subcommittee of Congress is the whole truth and nothing but the truth? The record will reflect that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Again, welcome them. And also, as a matter of business, members may have 7 days to submit opening statements for the record. And Mr. Conley, I'd like to keep the record open for 2 weeks, if we may, on this, because I think we're going to have additional questions with your approval. So without objection, then we will take member statements for 7 days, and we will keep the record open for addressing additional questions to our witnesses over the next several weeks. Okay, with that, we'll recognize and welcome Kelly C. Hogan, Assistant Administrator for Security Operations of TSA. Welcome, and you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman Mica, Ranking Member Conley, and members of the subcommittee, I'm pleased to appear before you today to discuss the Transportation Security Administration's Screening Partnership Program, or SPP. I am the Assistant Administrator for Security Operations at TSA and have been in this position for 8 months and have served in a variety of leadership roles in TSA since 2004. Prior to joining the TSA, I worked in the airline industry for 18 years, My experience covers many areas at TSA and airline operations, including staffing allocation, resource management, technology, development and capabilities, and international aviation. Congress, through the Aviation and Transportation Security Act, or ATSA, established TSA and required the establishment of pilot programs under which airports may apply to utilize private sector rather than TSA employees conduct frontline screening. As directed by ATSA, TSA selected 5 airports to participate in the pilot program representing 5 risk categories. SPP grew out of this pilot program, which ended in 2004. Today, out of approximately 450 commercial service airports, 14 have contractors performing screening, including the original 5 pilot airports. Of those 14 airports, 7 fall within the smallest classification, meaning they enplane between 2,500 and 10,000 passengers a year. These 14 airports represent approximately 4% of the passenger screening positions across the system. Applications from 6 additional airports have been approved and are currently in the contract solicitation process. I will note that since the passage of the FAA Modernization and Reform Act of 2012, all SPP applications received have been approved within the 120-day time limit. Once approved for admission into SPP, contract solicitation and selection are completed in accordance with Federal acquisition regulations. Over the past 8 months, in my position as Assistant Administrator for Security Operations, I have taken steps to further streamline application processing, improve the level of experience and expertise inside the SPP office, and in collaboration with my counterparts in the Office of Acquisitions, establish a 12-month timeline goal for application receipt to contract award. For airport operators interested in SPP, the TSA website includes the SPP application itself, an overview of application process, and contact information for appropriate TSA staff. TSA also utilizes the Federal Business Opportunities website to communicate with a wide range of vendors. For instance, TSA advertised and held an SPP Industry Day on January 10th, 2014. This event provided an overview of the program, the acquisitions process, and provided a forum for question and answers with the industry. I believe the steps taken have strengthened the program and made the program and application process more transparent to interested parties. Thank you for the opportunity to appear here today, and I will be happy to answer any questions, sir.
And we will hold questions till we've heard from all the witnesses. We'll hear from Mr. Mark Bell next, and he is the Acting Deputy Inspector General for Audits at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security Office of Inspector General. Welcome, and you're recognized.
Good morning, Chairman Mica, Ranking Member Connolly, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me here today to testify on TSA's Screening Partnership Program, known as SPP. My testimony will focus on the results of our audit of this program, which we published in June 2013. We performed this audit in response to requests from Senators Roy Blunt and Bob Corker, who had concerns about TSA's management of SPP and the procurement process at Kansas City International Airport. In this program, TSA first reviews an airport's application to participate and then, if approved, procures private screening services. At the time of our audit, 16 airports were in SPP. Since that time, 2 airports have opted out, which means 14 are now participating. TSA has accepted 6 more airports, but has not yet awarded screening contracts. We determined that although TSA administered SPP according to federal law, it could improve its program administration. Specifically, TSA did not adequately document its evaluation of applications and its procurement decisions, did not always use accurate information to determine program eligibility, and did not verify the accuracy of data used in its procurement decisions. As a result, TSA risked making incorrect decisions on SPP applications, not selecting the best contractor, and may have missed opportunities to save money. Until Congress passed the FAA Modernization and Reform Act of 2012, TSA had no criteria to use when considering applications to join the program. The 2012 Act included requirements for approving applications, a timeline for decisions, and a requirement to report to applicants in Congress about rejected applications. TSA complied with the Act's requirements in approving 5 applications submitted after its passage, but some documents related to its decisions included incorrect cost estimates and other documents were not finalized. We also identified missing details and inaccuracies in documents supporting 4 of the 5 SPP procurement decisions made between January 2011 and August 2012. For example, 4 procurement files contained a similar short paragraph noting the source selection authority's decision, and 2 of the 8 cost estimates had slight difference in labor hours and overtime rates. In September 2011, a federal court concluded that TSA did not document its independent analysis of an SPP contract for Kansas City International Airport. Following this, TSA took steps to ensure it fully documented its proposal analysis, its decision rationale, and the source selection authority's independence. It also began to require documented support for its final selection decisions. We reviewed the decision documentation for a subsequent contract and confirmed that it included the necessary details. Under the 2012 Act, TSA must also consider cost efficiency in deciding on airports' admission into the program. But TSA reported that none of the 4 applications approved since the Act's passage had reached the cost evaluation phase, so we were unable to determine TSA's compliance with this requirement. However, in January 2013, the TSA administrator directed that cost efficiency be evaluated when deciding on continued participation. TSA was also working on a methodology to estimate the cost of converting SPP airports back to TSA employee screening, but it had not yet determined the cost for any airport currently in the program. During our audit, we also noted that TSA screening cost estimates differed, so they did not provide a consistent basis for deciding on program participation. As a result of our audit, we recommended that TSA fully document its decisions on program applications and procurements, and that it use relevant and accurate information in determining eligibility and approving participation. TSA concurred with both recommendations. We closed the first recommendation because TSA had already begun issuing policies and reminders and started revising the application process. We consider our second recommendation to be resolved because TSA is working to improve application document review and cost estimates. The recommendation remains open pending documented support of these actions. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my prepared statement. I welcome any questions you or other members of the subcommittee may have.
Thank you again, Mr. Bell, and we'll defer questions. We're going to hear next from our final witness, Jennifer Grover, Acting Director, Homeland Security and Justice, GAO. Welcome, and you're recognized.
Good morning, Chairman Mica, Ranking Member Connolly, and other members and staff. I'm pleased to be here today to discuss TSA's implementation and oversight of the Screening Partnership Program. The Screening Partnership Program, or SPP, provides airports a private alternative to federal screeners. As others have already noted, of the nation's 450 or so commercial airports, 14 participate in SPP, and another 16 are waiting in the wings for TSA to complete the contract or procurement process. A year ago, GAO found weaknesses in TSA's implementation and oversight of SPP. Regarding implementation, we found that TSA was not providing clear guidance to airports on how to apply to SPP. This is important to ensure that all airports have a full and fair opportunity to participate. Specifically, we found that TSA offered online FAQs, but little else, and airports told us that they needed help with several issues, such as understanding whether or not they were good candidates for the program, how to complete the application, and specific guidance about what cost information they were required to submit. Industry representatives echoed those concerns, noting that airports were reluctant to invest in the application process when they were unsure about how they would be evaluated. Since then, consistent with our recommendation, TSA has posted additional guidance on its website, including examples of helpful information that previous applicants provided, information about how applications would be assessed, and clarification about the requirements for submitting cost information. Regarding oversight, we found that TSA did not evaluate the relative performance of federal and private screeners. This is important because private screeners must provide a level of services and protection that is equal to or greater than that provided by federal screeners. Therefore, we recommended that TSA regularly monitor SPP performance compared to the performance of federal screeners. Specifically, we found that TSA used its scorecard performance system to regularly assess screeners at every airport on numerous performance measures, but the result is a point-in-time snapshot of performance at that airport relative to its goals and national averages, but not a comparison to all of the airports in its category. So to address this question of comparative performance, GAO reviewed several years of performance data for the then 16 SPP airports on 4 measures. We found that private screeners did slightly better than federal screeners on some measures and slightly worse on others. However, we could not attribute the differences in performance entirely to the use of private or federal screeners due to other factors that can affect performance. Since then, TSA issued its first SPP annual report, which, consistent with our recommendation, includes comparative performance information for each SPP airport relative to other airports in its category. TSA also began verifying annually that the level of screening services provided by private airports is equal to or greater than the level that would be provided by federal screeners. We're pleased that TSA's changes address our recommendations on SPP. These changes also may help TSA in making future improvements to the program. For example, with greater clarity and transparency in the application process, additional airports may be encouraged to apply. Greater clarity and transparency may also help ensure that the application process is carried out in a uniform and consistent manner. With the new comparative performance information, TSA may be better equipped to identify best practices, as well as to identify specific SPP airports that require additional attention to improve performance. Finally, a better understanding of how well SPP airports operate could inform future decision-making about the program. Chairman Mica, Ranking Member Connolly, thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, and we'll start with some questions. I want to ask, first of all, Mr. Hogan. It's now 2 years in February since the President signed the bill that said that TSA shall accept these applications. How many airports have you accepted the applications for since then?
There were 2, Sarasota, Bradenton, and Sanford, Orlando. The 4 that were in Montana, Bozeman.
But those are not, like I was telling the ranking member, the decision on Sanford was last week to put out an RFP. It's taken 2 years to put out an RFP?
Yes, sir.
That's not acceptable. I mean, that is a slow roll, dragging your feet, as I described in the beginning. Congress said you shall accept these. Now, the other thing we have is the question of cost. And again, I go back to some of the initial costs we looked at. You have currently 51,000 screeners, right?
I have 48,000 screeners from a D-band part-time TSO to an I-band transportation security manager.
But we have 66,000 employees, and I don't know if you have 20,000 administrators. That would floor me. But it's estimated you have administrative positions of about 15,000.
I don't have 15,000. TSA, by my understanding and allocation, sir, has under 10,000. It's closer to 9,000. I have.
Again, how many airports? We'll go with your 9,000 figures. We have 450 airports divided by 2. That's an average of 20 administrative positions for every airport in the country. Some of these airports have 2 and 3 flights a day and just a handful of passengers.
Sir, out of the approximately 454 airports I have right now, I have a little over 2,100 administrative staff at the airports. The rest, sir, in that allocation include the surface, the cargo, the aviation inspectors. It all.
Well, I'd just give you an anecdotal experience at Orlando, where we pay on average, I guess, across the board, $38,000 for screening personnel.
The exact average.
Well, I'm telling you, that's the information we got from you all. I'm leaving on one of the concourses, and one of the employees takes me aside and says, see those 4 TSA employees? He says, they're all making in the range of $100,000 sitting on their butt. That is not efficient operations. That's paying these people what amounts to almost minimum wage. And we have still in the large airports very significant turnover. You have not only in the large airports, you have some airports in the Midwest where you have a boom right now, the difficulty of finding personnel, and you're sending people in. We've got the cost of sending people in for the national screening force. They send them in, they put them up in hotels, they pay them per diem, and they are the screeners that they have to employ to fill those positions. Again, the whole thing, if you add up the cost, there's absolutely no way it can be more cost-effective to run the model that you're currently operating. Also, let me just let's look at a couple of, we've got a couple of slides here. Can we put one of the slides up here that shows we went to Quebec, Quebec City. To be fair, we did emplanements, and we've got Rochester, which is one of the original SPP airports. You still have 16 personnel there making $80,000 to $100,000 apiece. In Quebec City, they have 1 federal person. Probably you need 2 if you use that to calculate. And again, I see the same thing at San Francisco, which is one of the original SPP airports. You have 84 TSA personnel, and you're spending, we've got the spending on that, $16 million, $190,000 on average for those personnel. Now, not all that cost, to be fair, is personnel cost at San Francisco. But it's very similar, and I use San Francisco and Toronto because Toronto has a huge international traffic in addition to SFO San Francisco. But you have, again, 84 personnel at that airport and huge personnel costs. And I could go on through this. Your smaller airports, even at Jackson Hole, which has been private, the airport does its screening, you have 6 personnel. Now, some of those personnel may cover some other airports at a cost of $763,000. Are you counting this in your cost of the SPP operation?
Just for clarification, sir, the numbers in San Francisco, I know that was 2010, and 2013 is 64. However, in the federal cost estimate that we use, we take the fully loaded cost for the FSD and staff. Now, there are certain positions which will stay in the federal government domain, even in an SPP, as you well know, as it relates to compliance inspectors and coordination centers and certain positions inside the FSD staff. But when we look at an airport, sir, and look at their model between federal and private, the difference between the fully loaded that we calculate with federal and then what we have with a private SPP, there is a difference, an incremental difference between the two, and the difference is put into the federal cost estimate with the FTE allocations and the total cost to support the contract work at a management level. So the net is exactly the same between the two, whether it's the federal or whether it's federal and the SPP contractor.
Well, again, you calculate some of those costs. You could dismantle a great deal of your Washington personnel if you have the private sector take. Most of our cost in some of these operations is personnel.
Absolutely correct.
Yes.
Yes. In the documentation we
but
provided.
again, there's no discounting for the number of personnel that you don't need when you have a private operation. There are models all over. I use Canada. I'd be glad to take you to UK. I'd be glad to take you to Israel. Again, highly impacted terrorist threat. But yet we go on with the most expensive model with people in some of these positions. The other thing we need to do is get you, we may need to get you out of this whole contracting business. You're one of the few agencies that does contract for these services. And we may look at moving that over to GSA and have them look at the contract. Particularly if we're going, and again, you can conduct oversight and audit and set the rules and regulations. I have no problem with the Federal Government setting standards. That's what they failed to do on 9/11, and that's what they need to continue to do responsibly, and audit the performance. If the private screening is not working as well in some instances, you get rid of them or it's corrected. But you cannot tell me for a minute that it costs less for the Federal Government to do this. I was telling to Mr. Connolly, too, one of the things the private screening has done is actually pay the screeners more. You're aware of that in some instances to retain them?
Perhaps they need to pay the commensurate amount.
But the whole first, the conversion to private screening, we still have 16 waiting.
Six, sir.
Pardon?
6.
She said 16.
I know she did, sir. I would have to talk with her. I have 6.
I apologize. 6.
Okay. If you have 6 waiting and you've had several drop out, the intimidation program is very effective. Now I understand people who ask for to opt out are also given old equipment, also harassed.
That's not true, sir.
I know it's true. Don't tell me it's not true, because I know it's true, factual. I know that also that they're the last for service of some of that equipment, for answers out of TSA, which never come. I met with all the screening companies, and I found out, again, some of the things that you do. Where airlines change and come into an airport, you don't allow a reasonable means of changing out the terms of the contract. You're one of the few, again, that put some caps the way you do and do not have a cooperative method of adjusting the contract for additional responsibilities that are incurred. Some airlines are new, and some service airports new. But I'm just telling you what we're learning about your operations. Again, we have several models that you can look at. One of the questions that I have also is, we have asked on several occasions to disclose some of your operating costs. I was given information that is termed sensitive, procurement sensitive.
Correct.
Now, I intend to release some of this information at some time to those who are going to compete. So we're going to have to sit down and decide what is going to be disclosed so that those who are competing have a transparent and open process to know what your costs are and what they have to compete against.
So
I'm just giving you advance warning.
So I would appreciate that opportunity to have that discussion with you about the procurement-sensitive information, and we'll have our legislative office work with you.
Because I want them to be able to compete honestly, but they cannot do that unless they get honest answers, and the public should be able to see your exact costs.
I believe we have our exact cost in a request for proposal with the federal cost estimate. And
what they're going to have to compete for now that you set caps. So again, we're looking again, and I appreciate your cooperation. The first time we've gotten some of the information, we're trying to decipher what costs should be attributed to TSA, and what, as far as the Federal screening, and what costs should be attributed to private screening under Federal supervision. So again, we get a very clear picture. But the mandate by Congress was pretty clear, okay? And it shouldn't take 2 years to get this moving, which it has done. I'll come back. Let me go to Mr. Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our panelists for being here. Mr. Hogan, in looking at the omnibus continuing resolution, which we anticipate we'll be voting on tomorrow, it cuts $336 million from DHS's budget, mostly for TSA, and it caps, I think, the screeners, the number of screeners, at a number of 46,000. And if I heard you correctly, you said right now you've got about 48,000.
Yes, sir, but that also includes transportation security managers and supervisors, so they're in the same PPA count, but they're not a screening officer.
So you could live with this cap?
I live with whatever my administrator submitted to.
I know, but I'm trying to get at
whatever they
how disruptive are these limits or cuts from your point of view in terms of your ability to fulfill your mission?
I will be able to fulfill my job at the level that the administrator supported and went to DHS with, sir.
You will?
The President, yes.
Okay. Could you walk us through a little bit? I'd like to better understand sort of the process of hiring and career fulfillment and so forth. How do we recruit somebody to be a TSA screener?
There's a multitude of ways. The primary way is posting on USA Jobs in the different locales where we have the vacancies. We end up having job fairs and opportunities where at some locations, Special Security directors come in, other locations as staff, and we give a pre-employment overview of what the job entails to ensure people understand that it is a very difficult job. As you stated, we interact with 1.8 million passengers a day, and we screen 1.2 million bags a day. And over the course of a year, that's a long period of time. So it is a very, very demanding job. I personally think, as I've said in town halls when I travel the nation, that it's the most difficult job in the Federal Government because you have to be on their game for everything that they have to do in the security effectiveness environment all the time, while at the same time providing the customer service and interaction with the American traveling public and our foreign guests, as you said. So it's a difficult job.
Sure.
So we do a lot of previews, we do some job fairs, and then when we have information on USA Jobs and other means as well.
Gotcha. Now, once, and you do background checks before you...
Oh, absolutely, sir.
So once you've sort of made a job offer to somebody, what kind of training do they go through for the job?
Well, you have initial OJT training, initial new hire training would exist over 80 hours. And then you have OJT or on-the-job training for additional 40 hours, and that's for a basic officer entry level. So there's additional training, sir, provided for unique types of equipment that you would use as well, okay, and that's incremental on top of that.
Right. So the basic orientation is a combination of 120 hours?
Yes, sir.
And is customer service part of that training?
Yes, sir, it is. Customer service is an initial part of the training. It's also on a recurrent training. I'll commit to you that I'll do a review and double the efforts for that interaction. I also want to go for the record and satisfy some of your questions that recently, based on direction from our Deputy Administrator, and I think it had to do with some questioning that Chairman Mica had and some others at the last hearing, we've instituted integrity training across the enterprise at TSA, and in there are situations and samples as it relates to service training. We've also instituted leadership training for anyone who manages any employees inside of TSA are required to have specific leadership training, and that service training was in there as well. I would also like for the record to say, sir, that currently today we're averaging about 35% of the traveling public on any given day, well over 500,000 individuals that come through our aviation system are going through TSA pre-check. Matter of fact, the Administrator and the Secretary for Homeland Security are at Dulles right now talking about a TSA enrollment site. And that changes the perspective of our passengers as well as the interaction of the officers when you have a passenger go through pre-check as opposed to standard screening.
Sure.
So we believe that will also change and have a dramatic effect on interaction with the traveling public.
And all of us know that customer service, look, every member of Congress is in the customer service business. I've been in public life and elective life 19 years, and I've dealt with all kinds of, I always say all of my constituents are wonderful, Mr. Bell. Some are more wonderful than others. So we experience, what you experience. People aren't all the same. Some people are very cooperative, and some people can be less so. While you're trying to do your job to make sure that everyone's secure in that airplane when they get on it, and nothing gets through, you're also having to deal with the vagaries of different personalities and very large numbers of people. And it's a huge challenge. And I'm sure if I had the responsibility, it would be a sense of great stress. But I still think It's not an either-or proposition. I still think we can have high-quality customer service and satisfaction while also just top-notch fulfillment of our mission. The two are not incompatible. They, in fact, are compatible. And as I indicated, I happen to believe that the less pleasant the experience, because we don't get customer service right in our interactions with the public we serve, I actually think it contributes to less cooperation, resentment, and a desire, frankly, not to cooperate. And we don't want that. We want people understanding our mission. And as I said, I've been amazed since 9/11 that at the level of tolerance and acceptance by the public, because they get the trade-off. But I think we can improve on that trade-off. And I think we have to do that. We just absolutely, there's no excuse for someone barking orders continuously at the public at any airport in America who's an employee of the Federal Government or a contractor for the Federal Government.
I would agree.
I'd lose my job if I treated the public that way, and rightfully so. My staff would be fired if I find that they treated my public that way. And we need to hold ourselves to that standard. And so I fear it's beyond the anecdotal, but all right. The Chairman has referenced turnover in TSA. Could you comment a little bit about that? How do you think it's, well, what is it, and do you think that it's too high and that there are things we could do to try to ameliorate that?
Too high is a unique definition. I know the attrition rate today, as well as last year, are lower than they were 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago.
And what is that attrition rate?
I think a lot of it has to do with the professionalism we're building. There's full-time positions in the TSA, but I also think,
what is your annual attrition rate?
I would have to. It's through calculation right now. I don't want to say the exact number because it's being worked, but somewhere between the 12 and 13 range is my understanding how we finished FY13. Part-time rates tread higher at full-time rates.
And are there things you've learned from that to try to get that done, to try to improve on retention and higher job satisfaction? Because
yes, sir.
It's not an easy job.
No, it's not an easy job. And as Chairman Mica said, and he talked about the average wage, whether it be in Orlando Airport or in other locations, the transportation security officers are some of the lowest paid Federal employees in the government. So we need to work harder and to see what we can do about the salary. But I think a lot of it has to do with flexibility and scheduling and the opportunities for career advancement and future development and growth, not only inside the TSA, but also inside the Federal Government.
Mr. Chairman, I don't wish to impose on my time.
No, go right ahead.
Is it?
There's just the two of us. Right?
All right. If it's all right with you, I'll just finish out because I don't have.
Yeah, go
all
ahead.
Right. Thank you so much. I would like, Ms. Grover, this may be a logical thing, to look at the turnover retention issue and what we can, in terms of best practices, what do we know that we could do or should do, including here in Congress, to try to help Mr. Hogan in his mission of higher retention and higher job satisfaction for people in very stressful jobs. Did you look at that at all? I'd like to see some comparison. I'm sure the Chairman would too. How does it compare with other Federal agencies? I would assume, given the nature, the stress of the job, that actually you're going to have higher turnover in TSA than you are in some other parts of the Federal enterprise. I think that's to be expected. But are there things we could do to make it more satisfying, to improve job satisfaction and lower some of that turnover and help Mr. Hogan in terms of retention? Has GAO looked at that, especially comparisons with either other Federal entities or the private sector?
In our work last year on SPP.
Could you speak up? I'm having trouble.
Sure. In our work last year on SPP, we were interested in being able to compare workforce performance measures for the SPP versus the non-SPP airports. And so that's things like attrition and injury rate and so on. What we found is that TSA has data that they collect for all of the airports that use the Federal screeners, But at the time we did our work, TSA didn't give the contractors specific instructions about how to define, measure, and collect the same data. So the contractors were providing TSA with information about attrition, but we found that TSA had no assurances that the data were comparable. And so we were not able to do a comparison of attrition at the SPP airports versus the non-SPP airports. So that would be one first step, is to make sure that they had comparable attrition data across all of the airports.
Yeah, and fair enough. But I'm also interested in the broader subject, not just comparing the SPP with non-SPP, but generally this whole area of screening with, say, I don't know, a large corporate entity. Well, if you're a large corporation with 20,000 employees, what is the expected turnover that absolutely you'd expect, just normal turnover every year? And because corporations do monitor that, because that tells them something about what's going on in the work environment and what do they need to do to retain. It costs a hell of a lot more money to recruit a new employee, train that employee. That's why I was asking Mr. Hogan about the process. And to lose that employee costs you a lot of money. It's cheaper to retain that employee. Well, what do we need to do that? And how does it compare in a stressful job, not easy, constantly dealing with the public, versus other lines of work? And what would, so that we can expect, okay, Mr. Hogan, an acceptable turnover, given the nature of the work and so forth, may be 13% a year. So if we find that it's 18%, then we got a problem. We all would agree we've got a problem, because 13 is what we are expecting. If we're below 13, then we're doing something right, and that tells us something too, and we want to do more of that. So I think we're going to need you to help us look at other benchmarks as a management tool, so that we can monitor what's happening at TSA and the SPPs, and so can Mr. Hogan as a useful management tool. So I commend that to you. Mr. Bell, have you looked at that at all?
Sir, that is not something we've looked at.
Okay, and let me just see. Oh, one of the things the Chairman brought up, and I brought up in my opening statement, was there seems to be some difference in terms of cost estimate methodology. If I understand TSA correctly, as I said, their finding is that SPPs tend to cost about 3 to 9% more than TSA itself. And of course, there are others, I think the Chairman is among them, who would argue that the SPPs actually save money, don't cost more. Could you comment on methodology and this discrepancy in cost estimates, Ms. Grover? Did you look at, I think GAO did look at that.
Yes, sir, we did. We looked at that, at TSA's cost estimating methodology back in 2009 and 2011. And when we did our last report on this, TSA did indeed show a discrepancy of 3% between the cost of running SPP and non-SPP airports. However, at the time, we did not have confidence in the 3% figure, because one of the issues that was still unresolved at that time was the question of uncertainty in the underlying estimate and the underlying assumptions going into the estimate. So whenever you build an estimated cost, you have to make a series of assumptions that underlie it. And ideally, what you want is a range around your point estimate, so that policymakers have a good understanding of the level of confidence in the point estimate. So the actual difference in costs could have been 3%, but it could have been 8%, or it could have been negative 2%. In other words, that it was actually less expensive to run airports with private screeners. And so until TSA has a good understanding of the level of uncertainty feeding into their assumptions and how that plays out with a range around their point estimate, I think there's still some question about the relative costs.
This, to me, is a very critical question that has to be resolved, because we can't be dealing with different assumptions about how to get at a cost estimate. We've got to have a methodology we all buy into, so that we can then have one set of numbers, not competing set of numbers. Because otherwise, how can Congress or the administration make informed decisions about which is better in a given circumstance, going the SPP route or going the TSA route, if we can't even agree that it saves money or costs money? How can we pass another bill mandating further privatization on the risk that we may get it wrong, that actually the assumption we are making that privatization is always good and always saves money is wrong? And I am a big believer that these need to be made, these decisions have to be made on a pragmatic basis, not a theological basis. Privatization is not intrinsically good or bad, and neither is Federal employment. It is a matter of what works. And part of what works is how much does it cost and what's the quality we are getting. And so it seems to me this is just a very critical question. And again, GAO can be very helpful in helping us get to the bottom of a methodology we all buy into. Mr. Bell, did you want to comment on that?
Sir, I agree with your comments. We didn't go into testing the cost methodologies. Similar concerns that GSA or GAO had, that we didn't have faith in the underlying methodology, and we didn't have enough information to audit to make a good conclusion. So that's something I know that TSA is working on. Our second recommendation is coming up with solid cost estimates. We're still waiting for that documentation to take a look and see if they've actually done that.
And Mr. Hogan, I assume you would certainly agree with the principle that we need one methodology we all agree on so that we can have one set of accurate cost estimates to make informed decisions.
Absolutely do, sir. And it's my understanding with our Federal cost estimate, we've taken all the recommendations for both the GAO and the IAG and put them inside there to come up with that. I know there's a large conversation or a different of opinion as it relates to imputed costs, as it relates to additional employee benefits, whether they be life insurance or retirement, corporate tax credit, or liability insurance. But those are costs that TSA is not allocated for, and they're outside of our appropriations. So I know the Chairman has expressed concern with that exact fundamental difference between, and I'm sure that will come up again. But as I well know, not being a finance major, and with the folks from the appropriation staff here, I can only spend money as it's been appropriated to me, and that would be outside my appropriations.
Right. Yeah, I just parenthetically say, as somebody who I represent the third largest number of Federal employees in the United States in my district, but I also probably represent the largest number of Federal contract employees in the United States. So I deal with this issue all the time about insourcing, outsourcing, and I absolutely insist it not be done theologically. One is not better than the other. It is a matter of circumstance and what's the best outcome for the taxpayer. But often the private sector will complain that the Federal Government often does not, you use the term fully loaded costs, but sometimes the private sector feels that when the Federal Government gets in the business of comparing private sector to public sector, it doesn't hold itself to the same standard it holds the private sector, fully loaded costs. So trying to get our arms around this in an accurate way, I think, is essential if we are going to make informed decisions moving forward. My final question, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence. The Chairman talked about, well, maybe what we need to do in contracting for SPP is get TSA out of the contracting business and give it a GSA. Any opinion about that, Ms. Grover, from GAO's point of view?
GAO hasn't done any work specifically examining that issue, sir. We would be happy in the future to do a broad review of the current construct of the way that TSA operations are being run, and to examine the question of conflict of interest and whether it exists under the current arrangement and what implications that might have for cost or efficiency.
You've looked at TSA's performance as a contracting agency?
Yes, sir.
And?
Well, they have a system set up where they meet monthly with each of their contractors and look at their performance on a very broad series of measures. And then they have systems in place to follow up in any areas where they see concerns or discrepancies. One of the things that we've pointed out in the past is that at the time of our review, they were maintaining all of those monthly records on paper. and we encouraged them to consider putting them into an electronic format to allow better contractor oversight over time.
Mr. Hogan, my final question, to give you a chance to comment on that. From your point of view, would TSA be alleviated of the burden if we were to, in fact, transfer all contracting responsibility to GSA, or would that just complicate your life?
I believe it would complicate my life. The acquisitions process we have in TSA, I think we'll see going forward satisfies the requirements of the SPP office.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, again, thank you so much for your indulgence.
Thank you. And Mr. Ranking Member, too, if you just, again, we go back and we got these figures from TSA. They spent $1.1 billion on administrative staff, $1.9 billion on their screening staff. I don't know if that 46 or 51 million. They have 66,000 total. But how many, Mr. Hogan, how many do you have administrative personnel in Washington, D.C.?
In my office, sir, I have...
Just in TSA in Washington, D.C.
My understanding, we have just under...
Headquarters staff and all.
Just about 4,000.
Okay.
2,500 total
3,900
in headquarters, but then if you talk about the general larger
just
area...
4,000. 3,986, making 103,000. Nothing, because I think people who live in the D.C. area need a good wage. But
sir, there's 2,500 employees at headquarters, roughly. If you look at the area, whether it be the TSIF, the TSOC,
I helped
AJ,
envision TSA
Understood.
with other members of Congress. Not in our wildest imagination did we ever think that you would get to 66,000. You're bigger than the United States Coast Guard and I think 6 departments of government. But 103,000, and I mean, we just divide this by half and we give 51,000 to 8,000 screeners. You might get a little bit better performance. And then they have 9,000, I mean, this is the information, 9,656 administrators in the field. And they're making 80-some thousand on average. I mean, again, I want people to have a living wage. This isn't about wages. I think we should keep them high for retention purposes, et cetera, whether they're private or federal. This isn't about union membership, and I told you that. San Francisco had unions, private screening under federal supervision long before the all-federal. So it's not about getting cheap labor. It's actually paying people more. We spent over $1 billion on training, and more than half the people who were trained have left. We compared LAX, Los Angeles, with San Francisco on the training costs, which we got access to, and it was $11,000 more per employer. That was what I was talking about for federal screeners compared to the SPP screeners training. I'm glad to hear you've got the integrity training going on. That's only after meltdowns. I mean, I don't want to go through the sordid history of even my own airport, Orlando, where it was on national television, the folks ripping off passengers. I'm glad to see you're taking steps in that. Let me go down to when Mr. Pistol came in, I sat with him, and he promised me a risk-based system. How many Americans that have had records of being airline passengers have ever been involved in a terrorist act?
How many passengers?
Well, how many, Americans that have been passengers with a flying record have ever been involved in a terrorist act?
I'd have to go pull the
records.
records. None. You're talking
There's none.
Inside the U.S.
I can give you the list of the people.
Or international.
I can give you the people who have been involved in terrorist acts. Richard Reed, he's one of the few Anglo names. He was what, Jamaican and English. You've had the shoe bomber, the Richard Reed. We had the Kenyan. Most of the events start in another country.
Correct.
Yeah. And at one time we had, it was a classified number, but it was just a handful of people looking at people who were coming into the United States. but 99.9% of Americans have never caused a problem. Now we're getting to where you're telling the committee that we have pre-check for what percentage?
Approximately 35%.
Yeah, 35%. It should be 95% or 99%.
Sir, I think if you looked at the
Mr.
statistics
Mineta and
had,
I don't mean to interrupt you. Mr. Mineta, when he was Secretary, we set this up. We had set up a system where it was 15 minutes from curb to the plane, okay? And at the time, the administrator was Michael Jackson, not the rock and roll guy, but the good Michael Jackson. But I'm telling you that that's the way this should operate.
so Mr. Mike,
If you come to Orlando Airport or Sanford Airport, what is going on is almost criminal to American citizens. The way they are treated. You just heard from the ranking member. He doesn't fly as much. He just drives across the 14th Street Bridge or wherever hell bridge you trip. But I fly all the time. I see what we're doing to Americans who pose no risk. And now I see finally the mess we've created, the lanes. You've got a clear lane. You've got a pre-check lane. Pre-check lane was set up with one. I don't know if you do that, but I do. It used to be you go through quickly. Now pre-check is almost worse than the other lanes. They've got a clear lane. They've got known crew member lanes. They've got, and then the poor bastard public is there with their kids and the other day I saw them patting down a gentleman if he posed a risk, dear God. But this is the mess that we have created, along with the expensive uniforms, the badges, the intimidation. We tried to get this shifted to, again, what we intended, private screening under Federal supervision, with the Federal Government playing the appropriate role, conducting the intelligence, setting the security standards, changing things out. You could go down to Orlando and probably let 90% of the people go through if you had a risk-based system with no hassle and screen them. But Mr. Pistol has failed to put in place a risk-based system. And now you're telling me, again, you're going to have 35% in pre-check, and I can tell you you're not ready for it out there, and it's a disorganization. The other thing that I'm finding out talking to the screening people, they have been the innovators. I know they're the innovators because I watched the transition. Probably some of the things I did to help TSA and almost all of the innovations I took from San Francisco and some of the other models from the private screeners. But they were allowed to innovate to actually process people efficiently and effectively, and I saw the results. They performed statistically significantly better. I know what happens now with this new evaluation and the tip-offs and all of that stuff to tilt the scales some. So I followed this from, again, the very beginning. But I'm telling you that, in fact, this needs to be converted out to a risk-based system. And then the thing that I passed 3 times in law, and we put it back in the FAA bill, we tweaked it a little, and now they're using it as an excuse to further delay. It's over 10 years to have identification with a biometric measure, a hard copy, and a pilot, for example. The TWIC card, now they wrote us and said they can't get a reader, so we spent $1 billion probably on TWIC cards that you have to use a driver's license because the TWIC card is, I just don't know where we end this. But I'll tell you what's coming is the frustration you heard here today, bipartisan. How many people do you have in your SPP office now?
I have 10 people right now.
Okay. Well, you may need a whole lot more because I think I'll get the support. I may not get it done this year, but I will get it done within the next year. Mark my word. Took me a while to get the change in the language, which now you're slow rolling. But I'll get the language that within a certain amount of time, you get out of the screening business, you set the rules, conduct the audits, et cetera. I will get the support to do it. one way or the other, okay? So if you can't handle it, we'll put it over in GSA, and they'll handle it as a contracting thing. We also need to get you out of the equipment business. You can't maintain, you can't acquire the acquisition. When you buy the puffers and they have to be destroyed to spend a couple $1 million, the backscatter equipment staff, I want to do a little investigation where we are in that. They spent $500 million on that. They've been removed. You deployed the, what is it, the RF wave, millimeter wave screening, which was never supposed to be used as primary screening. Never. Never. You've got people up there, little old ladies and people who pose no risk, and you're using that equipment on them and then patting them down. Come on, guys. It's just unbelievable. And that was another $500 million acquisition, $250 million they split between a couple. And then it costs $500 million to install them because they can do it the most expensive way. But I need to get you even out of that business, acquisition of equipment, acquisition of services, because you can't do it. Nothing against you personally. You've been there 8 months.
I've been in this position as Assistant Administrator for all security operations for 8 months. I've been at TSA since November 2004.
I'm told that the office, the SPP office, is in disarray as far as its leadership.
I disagree.
Okay, well, I'm just told that people who deal with them can't get an answer, and then also movement of personnel. We have a whole host of questions, some of them technical in nature. I want to know what the hell you've done with these applications. Some of them approved back in January 12 for your 6 airports. 2 approved in June of 12, 2 in August of 12, 1 of May of 13, and we still don't have these done after we passed the law. So the slow rolling isn't going to work. I'm going to probably let you stew in your juice a little bit longer, but I can tell you that folks are getting fed up with the whole thing, and there is support for a dramatic redo. If we could move people after 9/11 through in 15 minutes, and having had that risk at that point, here we are 10, 12 years later, and I know aviation is still a target, but we're holding millions of Americans hostage, and they're not getting proper screening at the most efficient, effective cost. So take that message back to Mr. Pistol. I'll give it to him personally. I do have more questions. We will submit them for the record. Mr. Conley, anything else?
Not at this time, Mr. Chairman.
You notice, again, a little frustration. I get frustrated sometimes. But I think together we can make it work better. I'm embarrassed. I created the thing, and it's gone awry at great expense and inconvenience. And security is incredibly important. We still are at risk, and I believe they'll use aviation again to come after us. But I don't think this current structure is geared to deal with that. Everything we've done is in reaction. Take off your shoes. That was the liquids. It's all reactive. Pretty soon we'll be going through there naked, and that's got to be an ugly sight for some of the public.
That's when I stopped flying, Mr. Chairman.
But I thank Mr. Hogan, Mr. Bell, Ms. Grover for your work, your cooperation. There being no further business before the subcommittee, this hearing is adjourned.